actually, we're a really small charity. We are focused in the East Berkshire area, so around Windsor and Maidenhead mainly, but we also have our refuges across the East Berkshire area as well, which I'll talk about a little bit more at the end. Okay, so very quickly, this is kind of like an outline of what we're going to look at today. So as I was telling Joe, this is going to be a bit of an interactive session, so please talk to me. That's kind of how I run my sessions, having a bit more of a conversation than just me talking at you for a while. We're going to look at some high-risk factors or things to be mindful of when looking at domestic abuse, and some of the warning signs as well. So warning signs being those factors at the beginning of a relationship that might make you think, oh, I don't really know whether this is right, whether it's wrong, maybe I'll just keep going and see how it goes. And these are the things that we'd be like, you need to be looking out for as indicators that something might not be okay in the months going forwards. And we also wanted to look at healthy relationships, so more of the positive side of this as well, because it can be difficult and very gloomy just talking about domestic abuse for a long time, but healthy relationships is really important to be looking at and defining in its own right as well. And to finish, we'll look at the support that's out there and how you can access that, but also about how to support friends or other people that have been through similar situations as well. Okay. Very quickly, just so that we're all on the same page, I wanted you guys to think about exactly what domestic abuse is, because it's a term that we use, well, I use on a daily basis, obviously, but it's a term we see a lot in newspapers, in media, but just thinking about exactly what it constitutes. And under the government definition, there are also 5 forms of domestic abuse that it's really important to be aware of when we're talking about this. So I was wondering, does anybody have any insight they wanted to share or anything they wanted to say about this, or any ideas on the 5 forms of abuse that might be listed on the government definition? I will say that verbal abuse isn't one of them, but they're kind of that set up, so it's something abuse. Verbal abuse fits into another category that we'll talk about. So any ideas? I'm going to put it out there.
Hello, Eleanor. My name's Rachel. I would say economic abuse, so taking away any form of economic freedom.
Perfect. Absolutely, yeah. It's one I hear least, but obviously that's normally because I'm talking to 14-year-olds or so, but economic abuse is a really, really powerful factor when it comes to our clients. I have clients at the moment that are choosing, having to choose between their safety and their economic prosperity at the moment, and that could be such a difficult choice for them. It's the main practical factor that prevents people from leaving, so absolutely economic or financial abuse is what we call it as well. Perfect. Any other ideas?
Hi, so yeah, my name is Emma. I was thinking as well about psychological abuse, or maybe physical abuse. I don't know if it's in the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually in chat as well, they said gaslighting is a form of domestic abuse. Absolutely, this fits into psychological abuse. This is when somebody tries to convince you that you're crazy, that you're insane, that you've misremembered something you know happened. And this is a massive part of domestic abuse. Absolutely fits in that psychological category. Perfect. Any other ideas? There is the obvious one, the stereotypical one that people normally say first.
How about physical abuse?
Yeah, absolutely. Physical abuse is definitely one of those categories as well. It is something, like I said, that newspapers and media will jump to because it's normally so shocking that somebody would treat a partner or somebody meant to love in that way. But it's the other factors that are more kind of subversive and more important to look at in some ways as well. Perfect. Any other ideas?
Sexual abuse. Sexual
abuse, yeah, absolutely. Same in the chat. Thank you. It's of course Sexual Assault Awareness Week, so it fits in there. For a lot of people, there's this idea that sexual assault is to do with strangers or people that you just met, but actually the vast majority of sexual assaults happen during relationships or from people that you are likely to know. It is a massive part of the work that we do and can you know, there's this idea that I sometimes come across with Welsh schoolboys, that there's a white and a black and sexual, and that there's this kind of like grey area in the middle, and there's no grey area when it comes to sexual assault. There is always consent or not consent, or there's coerced consent as well, which we'll talk about as well. Perfect. If I told you that the last form that we haven't got is actually the most common form of abuse, I don't know if that will spur anything on for anyone. We've got stalking in the chat. I like stalking. We're definitely going to talk about that later, but it's not one of the categories in and of itself. Laura said emotional. Yep, absolutely. It is emotional abuse that is the most common form of abuse, mainly because you can't have any of the other forms of abuse without having emotional abuse as well. You can't hit somebody you're meant to love or control the money of somebody you're meant to love without it affecting their confidence or the way they feel about themselves as well. So emotional abuse can be the most, alongside psychological abuse, it can be the most difficult for our clients to get over and to address. Okay. Cool, there we go. Okay. So domestic abuse is any instant or pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive, threatening behaviour, violence or abuse between those aged 16 or over who are or who have been intimate partners or family members, regardless of gender or sexuality. So there are some really, really important parts to bring out of that. So it's 16 or over. So it would normally be seen as an adult crime, but they have lowered the age of that as well. But one of the most important things is that a lot of people see domestic abuse stereotypically as just in relationships between partners. But actually, that's maybe about 80% of our work. The other 20 is between family members, so maybe between siblings, from children to their parents, parents to children as well. And this isn't just your normal family arguments. This is where one person tries to have power and control over other people in their households, and where the others are walking on eggshells around this person as well. As well, at the end there, we've got regardless of gender or sexuality. So while this still is quite a gendered crime, I would say that on average we have, for every 20 clients that come through, I would say 17 of them will be women. It is still something that happens across the board, across the spectrum, and in heterosexual relationships, in homosexual relationships, there is a really, really wide variety that kind of happens there as well. Hi, George.
I just wanted to ask a question on those proportions you mentioned. I mean, there might not be a definitive answer to this, but to what extent do you think that's representative of the actual numbers in which this is happening? Or do you think it's also there's a gendered split when it comes to reporting, and that potentially male victims might under-report or under-recognize when they're being abused?
Yeah, this is a really good question. Like I said, that was entirely anecdotal from me there at the moment, but we are going to come on to stats in a second, because I have a quiz for you all around numbers, and this is a part of that quiz as well. So if I can hold on to your question for just a second and we look at that in a minute, would that be okay?
Yep, absolutely fine.
Perfect. Wonderful. So that's a government issued definition. And actually at the moment, there is a domestic abuse bill going through Parliament at the moment, which writes this definition into law, which is great. It also criminalises some other behaviours. It makes tracking by the police slightly more targeted. It means the police have slightly more powers to address domestic abuse. So it's definitely something that will be interesting to see when that comes through, the effect that that will have as well. But this definition is definitely part of that as well. Okay. So those are the 5 forms that we talked about at the beginning. So psychological, that gaslighting, trying to convince partners that they're insane. So I have, like I said, I do schools workshops. I was at a school once in I think it was a year 8 class. So these children are around about 13 years old. And I was talking about psychological abuse and gaslighting in the process. And I normally ask a class, like, do you know what gaslighting is? And nobody normally puts up their hand, particularly at that age. But there was one boy that went, yep, what that is. My mum says I do it to her. And I was like, okay, cool. Talk to me about what happened there. Why did she say that? And it turns out she would come home from a day of work, she'd put her keys on the side and go do something else, like make dinner or go and have a bath, like distract herself from the day. He would go and take those keys and he'd put them back in her bag, or he'd put them down the side of the sofa or in her coat pocket. And in the morning when she was ready to go, she'd go to the side and they weren't there. He found this hilarious and it just massively disturbed me. It was definitely something I had a conversation with the school about afterwards, because those kind of behaviours, trying to convince somebody that they're insane, is really, really damaging, because his mum would turn to him and go, come on, where are the keys? I know that you took them. And he'll say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Maybe you left them somewhere else. You're always leaving things around. Like you've got such a short-term memory. Things like that with such deadpan. He could explain it really well as well, which was concerning. But that's kind of a basic example of psychological abuse that we talk about. Like I said, physical abuse is the one that people focus on a lot. Sexual abuse is anything from sexual assault to degrading somebody in a sexual way in front of friends or family, trying to lower their confidence or affect their relationships with other people because of inappropriate behaviour. Financial abuse is a massively powerful one, as we said, and emotional abuse encompasses all four of those other topics, plus a whole load besides as well. Probably what we're focusing on the most as a charity. Okay, as I promised, a quiz. So the first question that I wanted to ask, and people can answer how they want, either in chat or raising hands or anything like that, is how many women experience domestic abuse in their lifetime? So we have A, 1 in 25, B, 1 in 4, C, 1 in 8. Any ideas there? B, 1 in 4. A fair amount of consensus there. Anybody else that's not? We've got a C in there as well. Interesting, but mainly B, another C there. The answer is actually B. It is 1 in 4. It is a very, very high figure, unfortunately. It is something that is looked at, but this figure, a lot of the figures with domestic abuse are quite static at the moment, and this one has been static for quite a while as well. Yes, absolutely, it is from chat, it is a hugely unreported area. It is something that the vast majority of reports do not get to police. They are not, and then I've had lots of clients who have reported to the police, have got up their courage to report to the police, to then find that there wasn't enough evidence, or the quote, he said, she said, stereotypical answer we get, that really, there's a number of reasons that affects people reporting. Services like ours are there to kind of support those that don't feel like reporting or do, and that would like support with the process as well. Okay. My next question is, how many men experience domestic abuse in their lifetime? Is it A, 1 in 6, B, 1 in 15, C, 1 in 50? C, A, B, A. Got a lot more of a spread for this one. So I think we've got B, even more underreported there as well. B. So actually, the stat that the industry goes on at the moment is actually A. It's 1 in 6. So a lot more common than people think for men. This goes for our clients as well. When we ask them, people that have been through this in our support groups, what do you think the stat is? A lot of them choose C, or even say 1 in 100, but it is massively underreported as well. This is a specific tactic that are aimed towards men or those that don't fit the stereotypical model of domestic abuse, which we'll look at in a little bit. One of the tactics would be that they would say, you won't be believed. Who are the police going to arrest if you ring? Who are they going to believe? Are they going to believe that you, as a massively strong man, would be able to be abused by a smaller guy, a woman, a family member? Are they going to believe that? And quite often that fear is enough to stop people from reporting or thinking that they'll be believed as well. The stat, we're not certain about 1 in 6. We think it might be somewhere between 1 in 6 and 1 in 10, but 1 in 6 is the stat that the industry uses at the moment. Okay. So Emma asks, are those numbers for the UK context exclusively? They are, yeah, these are UK stats rather than England and Wales stats. Actually, this question is England and Wales, but in general, they're UK rather than worldwide or any other country. Okay. How many women are killed by their partner or ex-partner in the UK? And obviously this is a very kind of upsetting subject in general, but it's so important that we raise awareness of this and understand the kind of the depths that domestic abuse can get to as well. So we have A, 1 every 3 weeks, B, 1 every 3 months, or C, 1 every 3 days. It's got a lot of C's, 1A, a couple of A's, it's relatively even split, I think there. So the unfortunate statistic with this is that it is actually C. It is 1 every 3 days, which is a massive number of people that we lose to domestic abuse. I think the reason why, and people within the industry or within the safeguarding structures as well, they will massively underestimate this number as well. But when it comes to things such as knife crime or terrorism, we tend to link those incidents. We tend to look at them as a pattern, whereas when it comes to domestic abuse, they are seen as individual incidents. They are seen as something that happens behind closed doors to one family, somebody snaps, and we end up with a homicide. And that's just not the case. It needs to be looked at more closely. And there are a lot of people doing great work about this and making people link it. So Karen Garler-Smith does the femicide census, which is designed to look at women that are killed at men, women that are killed by men in the UK, and that racks up significant numbers. So there's a lot of work kind of going into this. The stat on there for men killed by partners or ex-partners is on there as well. Any ideas what that one would be? So it's not C, I will say that, but A or B? A. Yeah, absolutely right. It is 1 every 3 weeks. So not as common as women, but it's still there. It is still an ever-present threat for people who are going through domestic abuse as well. Okay. Which age group has the highest rate of domestic abuse? Is it A, 16 to 24, B, 25 to 35, or C, 35 to 60? C, B, C, A. Another spread here. Yeah, very varied answers there. But it is actually A. It is 16 to 24-year-olds that have the highest rates, which really surprises people. It's not the most forthcoming kind of answer. People normally expect it to be 25 to 35, and those are typically people who will be, I mean, like I said, I run support groups, and the support groups are populated by people in B or in C as well. We have less in that A category that are coming to the groups, and they might feel they've experienced it a little bit earlier and that they're more comfortable talking about it now. But this is why we try to raise awareness of this as much as we can, because that age category, 1 in 10 in that age category will experience domestic abuse each year, which is an enormous figure as well. There's lots of reasons why people think this might be the case. So unfortunately, typically teenage years are a time where there can be a lot of low confidence or self-esteem issues, which might lead to other people being able to take advantage by offering them that love and affection that they feel like they need. It might be a first relationship where people aren't certain of what's normal, what's not, and they might be convinced by maybe an older partner or a more experienced partner that this is okay, this is what relationships look like. If you're not happy about it, then you don't like relationships, rather than if you're not happy about it, you don't like me. So there are a number of reasons why they think 16 to 24 is the most populous age category as well. And Bella says in chat that we've stuck in abusive homes as well, and that's absolutely the case. That's definitely like a crossover period as well. So those that are experiencing abuse at home from parents or from maybe older siblings as well, there's definitely a crossover there. How often does 999 receive calls about domestic incidents in the UK? Is it A, one every 5 minutes, B, one every 30 seconds, or C, one every 30 minutes? So this is UK-wide. So we've got A, C, A, lots of A's. A couple of C's there. Interesting. The answer is B. It's actually one every 30 seconds. It's so much more common than people think it is. This can be for a range of reasons, but unfortunately there are specific times where we see spikes in this as well, and one of them is Christmas. So obviously we've just come through our Christmas period at the moment. We normally see a real decrease in our service in December. This can be because there is something to look forward to, that clients often think, if I can just make it to Christmas, and if I can make Christmas perfect and exactly the way that they want it to be, then they won't get mad, they won't get angry, nothing will happen, and it will fix our relationship and everything will be okay. There's that hope in December, whereas over the Christmas period, over those 3 days, it's something like 55% of domestic abuse, 55% of police calls are domestic abuse related at that time. It's when things are on unhealthy or abusive grounds already. Christmas, unfortunately, is a catalyst to further abuse. And it means that January is our busiest month of the entire year. And this doesn't encapsulate the calls to 101 as well, which we encourage clients to do, to log evidence or to report something that might not be happening right now, but is something that they would like to report as well. So it is B, one every 30 seconds. All right. What age group called the forced marriage hotline the most? So I will say within domestic abuse, and we're going to talk about this a bit later as well, we also encapsulate some forms of honour-based abuse as well. So where a community can rely on more traditional values or use culture as an excuse to control people within the community. So this can be with very strict religious communities, with travelling communities as well. We see a lot of people kind of reporting domestic abuse or forced marriage as well. So that's why forced marriage and the other associated crimes of FGM and honour-based abuse are included in domestic abuse as well. So the answers could be A, 1 in 15, B, 16 to 17, or C, 18 to 21. So we have an A in there. Any other ideas? B. A or B, B. So the answer for this is actually, it's an interesting picture here, but the answer is actually C. It is 18 to 21. There's not a concrete answer as to why this is. A lot of people believe that it might be because at that age, the risk is imminent. It's there. It might be that people ringing might know that marriage is set up for next week, that they don't know what to do, they can't find another route out, that they know they have to take action then and there. But the category after this is actually A, it's 1 to 15, which again, it's not an age where anybody should be thinking about marriage or having children or starting a family. But the reason why they think that is the second most populous group is because of possibly family structure. So these might be children that are seeing siblings forced into marriages, or siblings that are being controlled by parents or other family members, and that are more concerned about their future, their long-term future, going forwards as well. Okay, this is my last question, I promise. But what percentage of people would call the police if they saw their neighbour kicking their partner? Is it A, 25%, B, 50%, or C, 75%? There's lots of A's, a couple of B's, more B's coming through. So again, the massively depressing answer of this is that it's A. It is 25% would feel comfortable, would call the police if they saw their partner kicking their neighbour. No, their neighbour kicking their partner, the other way around. Again, there are lots of reasons why people think this is the case, but this comes with the taboo around domestic abuse. People think that it's something that happens behind closed doors. It happens to other people. it's something that is a private matter and shouldn't be spoken about, and maybe there's a reason why the kick happened, you know, in quotes. It's a really, really low and quite surprising statistic, but that's why we try to raise as much awareness as we possibly can, because knowing how to spot the signs of domestic abuse, knowing the best way to deal with it is the most important way to being able to get people to be safe, and hopefully increasing that answer, because it is a really shocking statistic. I think, I don't have it to hand, but I think the statistic for those that would call the RSPCA for a neighbour kicking their dog is higher than it would be for a partner to be able to call the police. So it's definitely there's definitely a misunderstanding there, there's a miscommunication, and it's hopefully something we can address in the next few years. Yeah, 25%, it's a low answer. Okay, I'm going to close chat for a little bit, but it will pop up if you guys want to say anything. I'm going to stay on this for a little bit, because there are some high risk factors that we look at when we're looking at domestic abuse that people might not be aware of. And they're things that can increase the risk of harm. So there was some research done, I believe it's Dr. Laura Richardson, but I can't remember exactly. She looked at domestic homicides and the risk factors that were included in each of those cases, and was able to kind of put together a risk assessment that is now used across the UK. It's something that we use for every single one of our clients. And within this risk assessment, we were looking at factors that are likely to increase risk of harm. So we've got some of those things on the board at the moment. So one of the highest risk factors is actually pregnancy. Pregnancies massively increase the risk. So about 30% of domestic abuse either starts or escalates during pregnancy. Anecdotally, it's what a lot of our clients say, that maybe there was a bit of control before they fell pregnant. But after that, the control over who they could see, where they could go, who they could speak to at appointments, lots of those factors became much more heightened as well. We think that this can be for, again, a range of reasons, but at that point, you can be sort of hooked in a relationship when you're pregnant, just because at that point, it effectively, unless something very traumatic or massive happens, you are then tied to that person for the next 18 years of your life. And it means that actually considerations about leaving relationships can be a lot more difficult because there are complicating factors involved as well. But pregnancy is definitely something that we look out for. I've put non-stereotypical victims there because it was a really difficult thing to term there, but it just means that when I ask my awareness groups about what they think the stereotypical domestic abuse victim looks like, they would say a woman abused by her husband who is 30 to 40, maybe a bit older, in a very traditional marriage. And this is not the clear picture of domestic abuse whatsoever. Like we were speaking about with the numbers for men, it is something that is less reported when the victim is not, let's say, white, they're not women. It can be very difficult sometimes to get over even the police's very stereotypical image of what domestic abuse looks like. And there are different tactics that go along with non-heterosexual relationships as well, or non-typical victims. So like we said, perpetrators will make sure that they very much emasculate male clients or male victims, making sure that they feel like they're not quote unquote real men is a phrase that we hear a lot from our clients. It is something that they will use to say that absolutely nobody will believe you, the family court won't believe you, the criminal court won't believe you. I can muddy the waters enough to make it seem like it could be either of us or we're both as bad as each other. When it comes to gay relationships, lesbian relationships, and bi clients, there are different tactics that go along there as well. We see a lot of cases of forced outing to family members or other people that are, connected to the group. So maybe we've had gay Muslim clients before who obviously it's a safety risk for them to come out to their family in some cases. And their partners have said, well, why don't we tell your parents how much we love each other? Why don't we come and talk to them when they're in the middle of an argument, which can make it absolutely seem that there's no other option, but they paint it in a very positive light. Like, we love each other. Why wouldn't we tell your parents? Why wouldn't we do this? So it then can be more difficult to argue against, or to feel like you're being the unreasonable one, when actually that's not the case whatsoever. And like you said, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men are likely to experience domestic abuse in their lifetime. This figure absolutely rockets when it comes to trans people. The figure is around about 80% of trans people will experience domestic abuse in their lifetime, which is shocking and horrendous, and again comes with its own set of tactics. So it can include obstruction from medical treatment or access to medication, or finances as well. It can mean that they will be more dependent on somebody because of social ostracizing. It is a really massive factor when it comes to trans people in relationship. It's something that we would love to raise more awareness of. And I know that you guys spoke to Gallup yesterday, so hopefully they spoke a bit about this as well. Gallup being the LGBT service of support for those that have experienced violence as well. Below that, we have honour-based abuse. So like I said, for communities where people within those communities will use culture or tradition or religion as an excuse for their behaviour. There is no religion or culture in the world that will excuse domestic abuse, but there are people within each of those communities that will take sections and justify their behaviour with it as well. But again, this is something that we would be looking out for as a risk that, and this goes with the non-stereotypical victims as well, that they might also not be telling the whole truth for fear of the repercussions. So we have seen clients who have protected their families by not talking about, for example, threats to kill, because they are concerned that then the police would take action or somebody would take action, and they can't fathom having to make that choice that would then maybe lead to more significant consequences for them as well. If we move on to the other side, we also have separation. So a lot of people think that leaving an abusive person is the first point to being safe. That once you've left, everything's fine, and that's the biggest step you can take, and then it's all going to be okay from there. And unfortunately, that's not the case. It's almost a case of the better the devil you know situation, in that if the abusive person thinks that you are in the relationship and that you're staying there, you're staying put, they feel more comfortable, the abuse stays at a certain level. If they think that they've lost that power and lost that control over you, that abuse can massively escalate as well. We call it the persuader. It's where they can use either positive or negative ways of persuading somebody back into a relationship. So either, I love you, I really care about you, I will get anger management classes, which don't work with domestic abuse, I will stop drinking, I will quit my job, all of these things to try and make it seem like they can then be the perfect partner again. Or we get threats to kill, or threats to kill themselves as well, which is the next topic, which actually keeps our clients precisely where they are for longer, because even if they thought that the chance that their ex would kill themselves is about 10%, that's still 10% more than they're willing to bet, because they do care about these people as well. With separation, it's definitely something that we look at as an escalating factor and something that we'd keep an eye on if a client came to speak to us about this. Moving on down from there, we have threats to kill and suicide, as I just mentioned. Any mention of suicide or murder or anything like that, it just shows that it's playing in their head a little bit. And while our clients might not think that the risk is there, it's still something that we want to keep an eye on as well. These are particularly pertinent when it comes to honour-based abuse. They are risk factors, particularly within some of the cases that we've seen recently, or not recently, over a long stretch as well. So these are really important to keep an eye on, where families might be putting pressure on people to remain in abusive relationships, etc. Below that, we have complex needs, which is, again, a really big umbrella term. But at DASH, we have a complex needs IDVA, and IDVA is an independent sexual violence advocate. Within complex needs, you have things such as substance misuse, you have homelessness, sex working. There are a range of topics that would initially obstruct people from getting the support that they need or stop them from being believed as well. So it can be that quite often these clients are the ones that are ignored by services, the ones that are left to kind of fend for themselves in a lot of cases. So that can really be a factor to prevent them from accessing the help that they need and to be able to keep themselves safe as well. And as mentioned on the chat during the quiz, we have stalking and harassment as a high risk factor as well. If a client came to us with any stalking type behaviours, immediately we'd be concerned, we'd be making that a high risk case, purely because stalking is such an obsessive behaviour. It is something where people will take hours out of their day to make contact with somebody, to find out where somebody lives, to follow them. And of course, with the rise of social media over the last decade, it can be more easy to find out information about where somebody is almost on a minute by minute basis. And stalking is a massive concern with that as well. I did mention, I promise I'm not going to talk about domestic homicides as much as I am at the moment, but with domestic homicides, 91% of murders in the UK have stalking attached to them as well, which is why it's such a concerning factor for us and something we really want to be keeping our eye on. It is something that definitely people don't recognise as stalking enough. So under the police official definition, there only needs to be 2 incidents for it to be classed as stalking if those incidents have intent. But on average, a client will wait about 100 instances before reporting to the police. So there's that massive divide there. And that's because we think about stalkers as being like a shadowy figure down an alleyway, somebody that we don't know, that doesn't know us, but is very kind of obsessed. But actually stalkers are much more likely to be family members, friends, and particularly in our case, partners as well, or ex-partners. And because of that, we might excuse the behaviour a little bit. We might think they're being overly friendly, that they're not respecting boundaries, but that if you're just nice to them, then it will go away. And unfortunately, with stalking, that just doesn't happen. So we would encourage people to at least get some advice with any cases of stalking or harassment as early as you feel comfortable, really. Okay. I'm just going to talk about something really quickly, which we call the cycle of abuse. So the cycle of abuse is one of the reasons why people remain in these relationships. My least favourite question in the entire world is, why don't they just leave? And unfortunately, I hear it far more than I should. Like I said, it can be that really risky period for people as well, but it's also because in these relationships, there's so many like mixed emotions. There is love, there is anger, there is confusion, there is hurt. There are all of these things that can prevent people from being able to see the relationship as clearly as somebody on the outside would be able to as well. And telling people to just leave ignores all of the complexities that come with domestic abuse. So like we said about finances, with self-confidence, feeling like, so for example, if we were to take a woman with 2 children, she might have experienced a lot of abuse around her parenting, so might think that she actually wouldn't be able to parent on her own, or that she'll be told that social care will take her children off her if she tells anybody about the abuse that she's experiencing. So with the cycle, what we see is times of calm, where things are good, where the relationship works really well. Sorry, charging issues. From there, we get to tensions rising. So that might be that suddenly you feel like you can't make the jokes that you would have made anymore for fear that your partner's going to get angry, that they're going to start an argument. From there, we see an incident. So those tensions get to a point where there's an explosion, there might be shouting, doors slammed, walls punched, even physical incidents as well. And from there, we get the reconciliation, the persuader side of things, where they go back to being the perfect partner. They seem to recognise that they've done something completely wrong, and that they're ashamed of themselves, that they'll never do it again. And that's the process that increases the hope and the optimism for a lot of our clients. They think that when things are good, that it will stay that way. And unfortunately, in an unhealthy or abusive relationship, we see people travel around that cycle a lot before recognising that actually their partner isn't going to get the support, they're not going to change their behaviour, and that it's safer for them after a relationship. Yeah, that's basically what we mentioned there. Okay, So it is Sexual Assault Awareness Week. And one thing I wanted to talk about quickly is tears consent. I'm sure you all have seen this. It's a great video in general. Obviously it misses some of the nuances, but it's so great at explaining a way of understanding consent as linked to tea. Would you, if somebody asks for tea and then says no, would you make them drink the tea? No, you wouldn't. So why would we consider this in a sexual relationship as well? If you want to look it up, I really, really recommend it. It's something that I use in our support groups to explain to our clients that that having boundaries is important. And if somebody isn't respecting those boundaries, then that's definitely a time to be recognizing that that relationship is not healthy. So for our clients in general, we see a lot of coerced sexual behavior. Like I said, in our risk assessment that we look at right at the beginning, there is a question about sexual relationships, and they will often say, I wasn't feeling it, but they'd sulk for hours if I didn't say yes, so I will say yes. And at the beginning of support, quite often people will not see that as assault because they think, well, I did say yes, I did agree to that. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And during support, we look at that. We look at increasing our clients' awareness and their kind of recognition around that and validation of their experiences as well, to know that actually they don't just get to say, well, I'm going to sulk if you don't, or I'm going to get angry if you don't, or I'm going to withhold finances if you don't. It has to be completely equal, enthusiastic, and given by both parties. I had a client recently on one of my support groups say that she had been in a very coercive sexual relationship with her ex-husband, and the first time that she was intimate with somebody else, she had got really defensive. She had, in her words, freaked out, of course, completely naturally, saying, I don't want to, let's do it in the morning, I don't want to do it now, I don't want to do it right now. And she was really shocked by their response because they said, that's absolutely fine, don't freak out, it's okay, do you want to talk about it, talk it through? And she realised at that point that she'd actually never spoken or understood the impact that the coercive sexual relationship had had on her and on her future relationships as well. But that's something that we're addressing through our group support at the moment. Okay, we're going to move on to warning signs and kind of the things that we would want people to be watching out for at the early parts of a relationship. This is one thing that clients always say, that if I'd have known they were going to be this way, I would not have continued that relationship. Or the more heartbreaking thing is they will say they called their ex psychos, they got really angry about minor things. I wish at the time that I'd have seen that and that I'd have run for the hills, but I didn't, I stayed there. And actually that's completely understandable because you have this kind of enthusiasm and this optimism at the beginning of a relationship. You can explain it away because the good times are right there. You can see them, you're having fun with somebody. Why would one small blip ruin this relationship? But there are a couple of things that we'd really want people to be looking out for when it came to this. So yeah, things that might indicate the relationship might not be the right one for you. Some of them will look positive at first as well. So they'll look like they're really that there might be somebody that's encouraging. We'd class love bombing in here. So looking like they're really, really into you, that they want to be with you all of the time, they want to move in really quickly, which we'll look at on the next slide. But actually they can be kind of set the ground for control going forwards. So again, in my school's work, I tend to use this diagram quite a lot for explaining some of those warning signs, and lots of the warning signs fit into these categories. So we have intensity to start off with. Intensity is what I was just describing, saying I love you after 2 weeks, wanting to move in after a month, getting pregnant very early on in a relationship that might have been completely coerced by the abusive person in that relationship. It is something that most of our clients can identify. It's very, very powerful. It moves. Why would you say no to somebody that shows you this amount of love? Is kind of the thoughts that go on in our clients' heads. They think it's a positive thing. This person really cares about me. I finally found a good person. I'm going to really commit, just like they're committing to me at the moment. But unfortunately, that hooks you in faster than if you were to take it slow at your own pace and maybe think, actually, I want to see how this goes before we really commit. Number 2 is jealousy. I have a massive problem with jealousy. It's something I make sure I discuss with the classes that I have. Obviously, jealousy is a completely natural feeling, but it's about how you act on that that's really important. So most of the perpetrators that we see act very irrationally on their jealousy. They will accuse clients of affairs. They will say that they were looking at people in a particular way. They will accuse them of even having affairs with brother-in-laws, sister-in-laws, whoever, just to try and, again, then separate them from other people. 3 is control. So this might be control over really minor things, where you go for dinner on your 3rd date, what movie you see, things like that, that it seems to be their way or the highway, can be the smaller factors that we'd maybe look at as we went through warning signs, which can then escalate into larger things the more kind of committed you are in that relationship. Number 4 is isolation. If I could give like one message, it would be isolation is the most important thing to be looking at. Because if you were in a new relationship and you were surrounded by friends and family and you felt that relationship starting to go wrong, you would talk to friends, you'd talk to family, get their opinions. And in most cases, they'd say, I don't like that. I'm not comfortable with that. I don't think you should continue this relationship. And you probably wouldn't because of the opinions of those around you. So one of the first things perpetrators will do will try and get you on your own, to put a wedge between you and your family, to make sure that you don't spend as much time with your friends, or that they get in the way of events you have with your friends. So maybe you plan to go out on the days that we could go out, and they turn up at your house to start an argument 15 minutes before you leave. Things like that, that make sure that your focus is on them and not on anybody else. Number 5 is criticism. And again, right at the beginning, this will start in a really small way and it might even look positive. Obviously, those that know that it isn't positive, but it might be things like, you know, I prefer that dress on you. I don't like this one. Or something that really kind of changes the nature of the relationship, that they're the one making decisions, and that you can feel over time. It's not a massive drop in confidence that we see at the start of an abusive relationship. It's more of a drip effect and something that chips away at confidence over time. Number 6 is more of a surprising one, but it's sabotage. So it can be sabotaging lots of different things for other people. I've had a client before where her partner would cancel her therapy appointments, or they would cancel GP's appointments. I have had a client where her husband effectively faked cancer to make her give up her job before so that she couldn't have other people around her. But sabotage can happen on smaller scales or on bigger scales. One of the things that we've seen before is people turning up of a morning to say, hey, how about we stay in? Look, I've got snacks, I've got a box set or my laptop with Netflix on it. Why don't we stay in? You don't have to go to your job calling sick. And over time, you end up losing that job because you're spending all of your time with a partner, and it can, again, feed into that isolation and feed into the control as well. Okay, number 7 is blame. Perpetrators will not take responsibility for their actions. They might look like they are, but in general, if they've done something wrong, there will be a reason for it. It might be stress, it might be alcohol, it might be somebody else. It, in a lot of cases, will be their partner. And they will often blame them for the difficulties that they're having, rather than having any sort of like self-reflection whatsoever. So they will kind of externalize that, and then our clients, again, with the loss of confidence that might come from criticism, they often feel like if they were a better partner, that none of this abuse would be happening in the first place, and all they need to do is just, you know, improve and be okay, and that everything will get better. And like we said, that's not the case at all. Number 8 is very self-explanatory. It's anger. This will be anger over very little things to start with as well. My colleague used to use the example that she had a friend who went on a date in London at some point, and this friend wanted to move with her date to another location. The date insisted on taking the tube, while her friend couldn't afford to, so wanted to take the bus, and they completely lost it at her friend. They said, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you just stay together? Like, why don't we take the tube? And just getting completely angry over something so minor. She kind of put it aside, but that relationship did not last because that completely irrational anger is not a good sign that early on in a relationship as well at all. Okay. Like I said, I'm going to try and talk about positive things alongside all of the kind of negative things that I address as well. So I will say healthy relationships are really difficult to define on their own. It's almost like you define it by the vacuum by saying it's not this or it's not that. But there are quite a few things that we'd look at to define a healthy relationship as well. But as I've mentioned, I do often, sorry, I've just noticed that. I get very distracted, sorry. Our clients, I run support groups, and I've been asking them in the support group as part of the support what they think the difference between an unhealthy or an abusive relationship is versus a healthy one. And even they can struggle to define it. They can give pretty clear examples of what they've experienced, but they're looking for that all-encompassing kind of definition of healthy relationships. And this is where I'm going to get into like all of the cliches and everything, so please excuse me for this. But the very basics, and it sounds cliche, but they are love, trust, and respect. Those three things interplaying. If you were to stand back from a relationship and do that kind of test, is there love shown here? Is there trust shown here? Is there respect shown here? Can be a really key indicator of what looks healthy and what doesn't. So I have some videos that Women's Aid have made before. They have shown one half where it's very unhealthy and one half where it's healthy. And if you do that test there, the love disappears because they are criticizing, because they're not showing affection. The trust disappears because they're accusing them of seeing other people, and the respect disappears because of the way that they speak to them as well. So very quickly, those three things are lost when it becomes an unhealthy or an abusive relationship. But I did try to put together some examples from both clients' experience, but our own kind of knowledge from domestic abuse as well. But some of the examples we'd talk about would be being able to communicate and move on from issues. So communication is obviously a cliche again, but it's really, really key to healthy relationships. Being able to say what you're uncomfortable with, what you want to change, and having that then changed is exactly how we'd want to see relationships occur. And being able to move on from that issue as well. What we might see from unhealthy relationships is that that issue comes up again, and it comes up again, and it comes up again, and it's not moved on from or resolved at all. And that can have a massive impact on mental health, on confidence, on feeling like you're just kind of going over and over things, which then feels very overwhelming for clients and can escalate into really massive arguments as well. I will say, I should have explained this earlier, but when I refer to unhealthy or abusive relationships, I'm kind of looking at a scale. So if you imagine there's a line here, most relationships are in this section as healthy. It is where you can communicate all of these examples in this section here. From there, we move on to unhealthy in the next section. There we might see, it might be what people call kind of the toxic relationships, or where they're both as bad as each other. And we would massively disagree with anybody describing relationships as both as bad as each other. In general, when it comes to abuse, there is one that is what we would call the main perpetrator. But that's kind of where it's not active abuse as such, but there are communication issues, there are ways of not respecting each other, arguments are not resolved properly, unhealthy is not a good place to be. From there, we move on to abusive relationships at the end as well. And relationships can move along that spectrum. We don't regularly ever see relationships move from abusive to unhealthy, but we can see healthy relationships move to unhealthy and unhealthy move to abusive, and vice versa as well. Some other examples of healthy relationships would be making each other laugh. I know, again, stereotype, cliche, whatever you want to call it, but this is something that clients come up with a lot. They say that actually they weren't able to laugh with abusive partners, but now they're in new relationships, now they've dated other people, they can see that that was something they were massively missing at the time, because it shows that kind of equality that's there. Another example would be having joint interests and your own interests as well. So things that you can do together, but also things that you can do on your own as well. A sign of unhealthy relationships might be that you're very codependent, so that you're constantly spending time with each other, that you're not seeing other people, that you're not doing other things, that you have to be around each other all of the time. That doesn't make for a healthy setup, because if that relationship were to end, that can lead to a massive crisis of confidence, of self-image. It's not a healthy way of being. Next point that we'd look at would be equality, in respect for each other, treating each other as equals in a relationship. Chores, things around the house, for example, and in terms of finances as well. So, of course, people can set up their own financial arrangements when it comes to relationships. Obviously, that normally comes a little bit later down the line, but it has to be with consent, that everybody is consenting to what happens, and there is no guilt, there is no blame that's attached to finances as well, or any form of control over that. Next one would be to compliment each other. Again, cliche, but making somebody feel nice about themselves and raising them up is something that our clients say they were massively missing at the time of their abusive relationship as well. This links into encouraging the other person's goals. Sounds simple, but it's just making sure that anything that they want to achieve, that you're working as hard as you can to help them achieve it, rather than trying to tear them down. A client I have at the moment, she separated from her partner back in around about October, and they had always been very dismissive of her desire to start an art printing business, to start out on her own. They had always said that she wouldn't make it, that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't have enough business sense, that she wasn't smart enough to do it. And actually, now that she's separated, this is something that she's really looking at, which I can see from the conversations we've had how much joy that sort of brings her. And a relationship should not get in the way of your goals or your aims for your life as well. But the most important word that kept coming up was comfortable. Relationships should be what you're comfortable with. That will obviously, it will change per relationship. Some will, we talk sometimes in schools about making jokes about the other person's expense, and how in some relationships that will be very unhealthy, that will lower somebody's confidence, but in others, it can be okay, so long as both are okay with that. But obviously for us, that's sort of touch ground in general, but comfortable is the most important word there. Okay, I'm going to move on to the last kind of section, which is getting help and support for other people. And I think, so I'm just going to go over a couple of standard practices to start with. But if you think that your relationship is unhealthy or abusive, it is so important to trust your instincts. If it feels like it's wrong, or that something's not okay, but your partner is telling you that it is, that everything's fine, that you're just being stuck up, that you're the one with the problem, trust your instincts, it probably isn't okay. Because if everything in your body's kind of screaming at you that it's not, trust that. It's important to not blame yourself. A lot of our clients do this. They either blame themselves for quote unquote allowing the abuse to continue, which nobody does. You're not choosing to be abusive or to be abused, the other person is choosing to abuse you. But that blame can sometimes get in the way of people accessing the support that they need. So it's important that not to blame yourself and to look for that help that is available. But the most important thing that you can do is talk to other people. At the lower end of the spectrum, you've got friends and family. I'm not saying lower as in they're not important. They're down there because they're so important, because they're people that can keep you safe on a day-to-day basis, people that you can keep up to date with. You've then got, above there, you've got professionals. So people often see kind of the pinnacle of this as being the police, telling the police what's going on. But, we would encourage people as much as possible to let the police know, even if it's just to gather data or evidence for future reference. But you also have a load of support in the middle there as well. So organisations like mine, the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, people connected to the university, student services, things like that. It's really important to let them know as well, because checking in with somebody is the most important thing. We're going to talk about this a load more in just a second, but we want to look at how to support a friend as well, because unfortunately you are highly likely to experience this with a friend in the future. So I've been doing this job about 3.5 years now, and I have supported 2 friends with similar situations. And all I want to, I went to university in Scotland, and so I'm back down here, and it was such a long way for a particular friend that I wanted to help. And all I wanted to do was like drive up there and go and get her and make sure that she was okay. But actually that's not the best thing to do when it comes to supporting a friend. So the most important thing is to listen without judgment. What they're sort of expecting is what the perpetrator will tell them to like increase their nightmares about the situation. So they'll say, nobody will understand, nobody will believe you, the police won't believe you, everything like that. So if they think that you're either judging the situation or that you're going to say, I wouldn't stay in that, I wouldn't have stayed, why are you staying, what's going on? Then they think that you don't understand, and they're more likely to actually return to the perpetrator because they think that their perpetrator understands them better than you do. So making sure that you're listening and that you're paying as much attention to what you're saying as possible. The next point is kind of to tell them, don't just leave. It can be really difficult, like I said, to leave these relationships, and that's a very kind of reductive point there. Tell them that nobody deserves to go through what they're going through, so reinforcing and validating their experience. But the most important point is to be supportive. You can disagree with the choices that they make, but going back to those warning signs we were looking at in isolation, what you don't want to happen is that you say, you need to leave them, or I can't be friends with you anymore. I can't support this if you're going to still be with them, because then they will feel even more alone than they were to start with. So making sure that you're always there, always on the end of the phone, that regardless of whatever choice they make, that you're going to be there, is one of the most important things to hurrying kind of that change from the other person. Okay, I'm going to stop talking for a second. I put on the board a kind of scenario that I look at occasionally, and just want to know your ideas about how you would support this person, how you would look at getting them help, how you would talk to them, what you think. So if anybody wants to share any ideas, that would be great. You can put it in chat, you can unmute yourself, but there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just a bit of a discussion. That's okay. Any ideas?
Hello, I'm Bella.
Hi.
I guess if I was in that situation, I mean, my friend was in that situation, I would try to maybe ask how their relationship is going, you know, try to get some more information and allow them to open up, as it seems like the person in the situation doesn't have a lot of information about what's going on. So kind of trying to get in touch with my friend and, you know, trying to get to pierce little bits and pieces together before initiating something more serious.
Yeah, perfect. I did leave this intentionally kind of vague. In general, from the outside, you might not see that much because of that isolation, because they back off a bit. So absolutely trying to make contact, asking them really open questions as well, like you say, like asking how the relationship's going in a way that they could, if things are bad, they will interpret it in a bad way. But if things are good, they can just say, yeah, things are good, this is what's happening. But yeah, open questions are really important, and we'll go on to why they're so important in a second. We have some things in the chat. Go and see a professional. Absolutely, we have people ringing our helpline all the time who are maybe friends or mothers or fathers of people who are in abusive relationships, and they're asking for the best way to access support for their child, relative, friend, people that they want to get the support for. And that's definitely a good place to start, particularly if you're feeling completely at a loss, you don't know what to do. Amy said, I would make sure that I repeatedly let them know that I am there for them and able to, oops, sorry, I had it, this scrolls very fast. That I am there for them and able to listen to them. Yeah, absolutely, really important. It can be, I will say, again, from personal experience, it is the most frustrating thing to know what's going on but not be able to do anything about it, because I mean, at your age, you're adults, you can make decisions for yourself, even if friends don't think it's a smart one, even if family doesn't think it's a smart one. Those are the decisions that you make but having people around you that are supportive and understand and listen is the most important factor to getting people the help that they maybe need. Joe said you can talk to mutual friends and say we all need to reach out and include them in social events so they feel included. Absolutely. Big groups are great. Really, really important to get people involved and make sure that they don't feel that level of isolation, because what perpetrators as well might be saying is your friends don't understand you, or your friends are too immature for you, or they don't respect you. And kind of putting in that wedge that way so that your friend might think, you know, maybe they don't understand me, maybe they don't listen. And your job is then to do the utmost to prove that you do, that you are a good friend. Chloe said, meet in a safe and comfortable environment and ask open-ended questions, being non-judgmental and encouraging them to reach out to others and being non-confrontational. Yeah, absolutely. All of those things are really, really important. But yeah, well done, Chloe, for also recognizing that we need a way of getting in contact as well, because it can be really concerning when a partner is in charge of somebody's phone. It's something that we come across quite regularly. There are multiple clients that we can't leave messages for, that we can't text, that we can't ring from withheld numbers or from known numbers because the partners might be monitoring them as well. So it might be an idea to try and talk to them in person and not put so much on the messages so that the other person isn't at risk. And being non-confrontational is really important. I have previously, in schools with more immature people, had comments like you'd go around there and get them, you'd challenge the other person to a fight. I'm not joking, people have thought this is a genuine suggestion. And all of those things, they do absolutely nothing but put your friend more at risk. The perpetrators don't particularly like being labelled as perpetrators or knowing that people know what they're doing. So alternative methods of communication done during lockdown, yeah, that can be really difficult. And there are a couple of apps that can help with that. And my brain has gone completely blank as to what they are at the moment. Sorry. But maybe working out a code if you are able to see them for a walk or know somebody that they live with, working out a code so if they send a particular emoji or they send a particular word that you know that means that they want to talk on the phone. It might be worth setting up kind of group conversations that look like nothing, that look like, you know, just catching up with people that then they're able to join in. There's lots of individual circumstances and it's best to try and work around the person and what's best for them. But yeah, really difficult. Chloe says you can come up with the same kind of code set, such as ask for Angela. Yeah, absolutely. So in pubs, when we were allowed to go to places like pubs, you could go to the bar and say, I want to talk to Angela, and they would take you through to the back, call you a taxi and be able to get you out of a situation that was dangerous to you. So yeah, kind of codes like that can be really important, or just keeping as in contact as possible. So I have a client that I haven't been able to speak to in more than 3 months, but we communicate via text, or we make sure that she has a phone. Other clients have had phones that the perpetrator doesn't know about. And if they are able to keep that completely safe and completely kind of tucked away, then that can be safe, or email addresses that perpetrators are completely unaware of as well. So things like that can kind of work out. How do you know, how do you do when they don't reply consistently? That can be the struggle, but it might just need that one conversation, maybe on the phone, maybe out for a walk, where you say, come on, let's go, and try and get them out of the house as much as possible, where at that point you can kind of set the boundaries, say, I am concerned about this, I want to know how to help you best, and working out a plan from there onwards. But there's no easy solution, unfortunately, during lockdown. It's been a real challenge for us. We're seeing the same kind of numbers right now coming through for support that we saw back in April, which was eerily quiet, the number of people that are not reaching out for support. But there will be a way of speaking to each person individually. It just needs to be kind of worked out eventually. Almost like it can be like spy level stuff, of maybe even writing letters if that's a safe thing to do, although be very careful with that if it's not. If they're not living with the person, that might be the safest route, but that can be, yeah, it's a real struggle. What would you recommend for people who don't want to see themselves as victims, e.g. this behaviour is not that bad because it's not physical. Absolutely, yeah. And obviously, I will use the term victims and survivor interchangeably. So a lot of our clients have said that they're very comfortable with the term victim because it doesn't define who they are. If they have been a victim of crime, they have been a victim of something, but they're also survivors as well, just on a linguistic front. I will actually, Joe, I'm going to hold on to that for a second, if that's okay. I think, is that next? Okay, I'm going to move on to it now, actually, and then we'll go back to it. So, stages of change. This is another sort of model, and I don't want to kill you with models, but it's something that really, really explains how to talk to somebody at different stages of what they're thinking. So we have pre-contemplation. This is where, to a person or to a friend, everything is fine. There is not a problem. Everything's okay. So if you were to say, are you being abused? They would say, what are you talking about? Absolutely not. It wouldn't even cross their mind. From there, clients will move to contemplation, where something might have happened or something might have caught their attention and they might think, actually, that's not okay. I don't know why that's happening. And they will start to think about whether or not behaviours are abusive or not. We will then move to preparation. So that's preparing to leave, preparing to make a change, but aren't quite ready to make that yet. So that might be looking for a flat that's away from their ex-partner or who their ex-partner isn't aware of the address. It might be looking at changing their phone numbers, but they're not ready to make that change yet. We move then to action. That's when maybe there's been a big incident and suddenly they want to go, they want to leave, they want to get out. And action is where they're able to do that. Maintenance is then maintaining that change, maintaining being split, getting on with their lives, being able to be financially independent, kind of maintaining that split and feeling okay because of it. At this point, there are two routes. This diagram didn't have it, but one of the routes is to relapse. So it might be that they come across a problem, that they run out of money, that their ex is trying to starve them out, that something kind of happens in the relation, in their kind of independent lives that makes them think, you know, I can't cope with this, I can't do it, and they'll go back into the relationship thinking that that will fix some of the problems that they've encountered. And we do see clients kind of move through that cycle, again, a bit like the cycle of abuse as well. But I've included this, bear with me for it, but it's because at each of these different levels, there's a different way to talk to people who are experiencing it. So from Joe's question, people who don't see themselves as victims or the behaviour not being so bad because it's not physical, I would put them at kind of like a contemplation stage where they are kind of thinking about it, but they're not too sure. They know it's not okay, but they can explain it away. And the most important thing there is that you're not using a lot of the jargon that I've been using for the last hour, that you're not using words like abuse, perpetrator, victim, things like that, because they will absolutely not relate to those. So the wording that we'd want to be asking more is like, are you comfortable in your relationship? You feel like you're walking on eggshells. If you were to ask them this, how would they respond? And things like that. So asking really open-ended questions and then gently and kindly, but kind of calling them out on any inconsistencies. So they might say, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of them. Nothing's going on. There's not a problem. But then saying, I wouldn't talk to them about money. And saying, but you did say that you weren't afraid. So you can say that you're not afraid, but why wouldn't you talk to them here in a healthy relationship? You should be able to. I want to try and help, and being able to question kind of in that way, in the kindest possible way, showing that you do understand, but still it being questions rather than, well, you said this, that's different, you're not making sense, anything like that. So contemplation is a very different state than maintenance. Lots of my clients at maintenance, I can talk to them about their ex, I can say the worst things about their ex-partners, and they wouldn't care. I don't, obviously, I am professional, but when I have clients who are at contemplation, I do have to be really careful about what I'm saying because it can, in a way, push them back to pre-contemplation if they're asked the wrong thing at the wrong time. So hopefully that answers a little bit about that, but you've just got to kind of note the inconsistencies. So you're saying it's not that bad because there's no physical abuse, asking, but that you're crying, you're really upset. You're not acting the same way that you did 6 months ago before you met them. And I'm really concerned about that. I want to make sure that you're okay and you don't seem okay to me. I'm asking more questions around that than being like, you are being abused, they are a perpetrator, we need to get you out. All of those things, big decisions like that will scare somebody at contemplation stage back to possibly pre-contemplation. Okay, I'm going to skip safety advice in general. I'm going to go on to our safety plans and kind of what we look at. But there are areas of safety to look at, which would be safety at home, how their home security works, safety out and about, so who they're seeing, are they going down dark alleyways, do they walk past their ex-partner's house, things like that, and how best to keep safe around that. Safety on their phone and online, preparing to leave and keeping children safe. These are the 5 areas that we tend to look at. For more information, it is best to talk to a local domestic abuse agency. The safety plan should be done with professionals rather than just on your own, but clients in general tend to know what's safest for them as well. Okay. Means that I'm a bit confused when it comes to distinguishing between unhealthy and abusive relationships. For example, a lot of couples might go through rough periods of intense arguments, or they might have toxic traits that they later decide to work on and make the relationship work. So if we look at a relationship where there is things like intense jealousy or arguments, how can we know if it is an abusive situation or a healthy situation that simply requires therapy or better communication and trust? So a lot of our clients will look at therapy and communication. I know there was a question higher up about like perpetrator work and things like that, and I'll come on to that kind of at the discussion at the end. I would say that one of the key things is their ability to recognise that they need help. So for toxic or unhealthy relationships, there might be an understanding that, you know, I shouldn't have done that, or I need to get help with my stress, my mental health, my drinking, any of those things, and that they're kind of willing to work on it and that they recognise it. When it comes to abuse, it is very much, I've not done anything wrong, you are the problem. If you'd just done this, if you'd just done that, then we'd be okay. Unhealthy is where it is, you're right, it is a really difficult thing to define, and it is different per couples as well. But the ability to change is one of the key factors in recognising it. But unhealthy is where we might be seeing kind of a pattern of breaking up and getting back together, breaking up and getting back together. Some instance where it might be instigated by one of the couple and not by the other, and another instance where it's instigated by the other person. Those, if it looks more equal on the outside, that's more of an indicator of unhealthy relationships. But again, that can be a tactic of disguising abusive relationships as well, because perpetrators will try and muddy the waters by saying, actually, they're crazy, they're insane, they started this, they've done this to me, make it look different. So in short, it's a really difficult question to answer, but there is a lot of information online about this. So if you were to look up unhealthy abusive relationships, there's a lot of kind of examples they will give about dividing into the 2 categories. But abusive is where somebody is controlled and coerced by somebody else. Unhealthy is where it's not the right relationship for them, but that controlling aspect might not be there to the extent that you would see in an abusive relationship as well. I hope that's sort of useful, but hopefully we can discuss that in a second as well. Okay, support available very quickly. So I'll talk quickly about the work that we do. Like I said, we're a small charity. At the moment, we cover Windsor, Maidenhead, and have refuges across the whole of East Berkshire. If I could chat just for a second. IDFAs are independent domestic violence advocates. It's a qualification that our staff have to support those that are experiencing domestic abuse. They will support high-risk victims. We are there to keep survivors as safe as possible, to address their priorities, which might be housing, it might be therapy, it might be financial, it might be support for their children. Those are the kind of things that we work around. It might be speaking to the police, criminal justice, family courts, things like that as well. But we're also there for a lot of emotional support and validating clients as well. I think know that they're not mad as they've been told by ex-partners for thinking the way that they think. Like I said, we also have our refuge services. Refuge is something that a lot of people will jump to when it comes to domestic abuse, that you can go to refuge and you'll get the support and it will be okay. But it is very much a worst case scenario. So you cannot attend refuge, you cannot live in a refuge that's in your area. You'll have to go somewhere else because the area itself is not safe for you. So if we had clients, we can't put them in our refuge. We would have to put them in a refuge in Reading or in different areas of London, but occasionally it depends on refuge space, and we've had to look as far as Lancashire before, and in some places Scotland, which can be really difficult for clients. So it is a worst case scenario there. These are some support networks that are available. So there's us up there, Gallup, who you heard from yesterday, which is, it's great that they were doing speaking here. Athena is the local support service for Lewisham. I will say that they have a lot of support on their website and a lot of information, so go and have a look there. A support service that does have support in or close to your area, much as we are, the same is Southall Black Sisters. They do such exceptional work for non-white communities in the area. They are incredible. They are currently putting a super complaint into the police for their treatment of some of their clients, along with the Centre for Women's Justice and things like that. So they do exceptional advocacy work as well. So they're a great resource to look at. The National Domestic Abuse Helpline is up there as well. Carmen Ivana supports people who have been through honour-based abuse. They're a great advocacy service as well, and they're grassroots as well, which is incredible. There's the Men's Advice Line for support for men who've experienced domestic abuse. And up there I've put as well DV Assist. So you can, if you're experiencing domestic abuse, get a civil restraining order from to keep an ex-partner away from you. And DV Assist can help with this as well. So it doesn't mean that you have to provide lots and lots of evidence and go through horrible, protracted criminal court proceedings in order to get protection. It can mean that protection is there in the next few days. So there are legal solutions to looking at your safety as well. But the most important numbers are the numbers in the middle of the screen. It's 999 and 101 if you feel comfortable being able to call on that as well. I'm gonna, because I've talked so much, I'm gonna stop that share for the moment and kind of come back to